Today marks our first hearing since the election, in which President Trump won in a landslide. This summer, Ranking Member Ratskin described Republicans as a, quote, shrinking, shriveling minority party. They're a cult of personality, and there's not many people who are buying the cult and dogma anymore, end quote. Yet just 2 weeks ago, President Trump received historic support from Americans of all races, religions, and backgrounds. It's clear the American people aren't buying what the Democrats and their allies in the media are selling anymore. For nearly a decade, Democrats, many of whom are in this room today, have demonized the millions of Americans who support President Trump. I think of the proud Americans in my district, good neighbors, citizens, and God-fearing individuals. They're tired of being called trash, cult followers, fascists, Nazis, and many other horrific names for simply loving their country and supporting President Trump. My constituents want the cost of living to stop skyrocketing, whether it's food, gas, heating their homes. They want the border sealed to stop the flow of illegals and criminal aliens coming to our communities. And they want to end the weaponization of government. Unfortunately, we have recently seen a disturbing example of this weaponization of government on full display. In the wake of Hurricane Milton, at least one FEMA official engaged in political discrimination against supporters of President Trump. Unfortunately, we have recently seen a disturbing example. This official ordered employees to discriminate against vulnerable Americans affected by a hurricane when they needed assistance the most. This same employee alleged on TV that this was not an isolated event and that FEMA essentially treats the homes of President Trump supporters as if they were homes of people with vicious dogs. This official ordered employees to discriminate against vulnerable Americans affected by her. This is unacceptable. Americans demand accountability. Today's hearing provides members and the American people the opportunity to get answers about these troubling developments that have overshadowed FEMA's critical mission. While today's hearing will focus on FEMA, the issue at hand is part of a larger problem. The urgent need to hold the unelected, unaccountable federal workforce accountable to the American people and the duly elected President of the United States. In his first term, President Trump faced not only open insubordination from federal employees who refused to help implement his policies, but also subtler practices intended to thwart elements of his agenda. And we're already hearing through media reports that some federal employees from DOD, EPA, and of course DOJ are already plotting to thwart President Trump's agenda when he is sworn in as president in January. The current system does not have strong enough mechanisms to ensure accountability. The disciplinary system is run by and for civil servants to protect civil servants. President Trump has pledged to take action to bring accountability to the federal workforce and ensure there are measures in place to appropriately deal with poor performers and those who actively resist implementing the policies of a duly elected president. And he will have strong allies in the Republican members of this House Oversight Committee. Democrats claim President Trump is trying to politicize the civil service, but situations like the one at FEMA validate our concerns that it is already politicized. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the civil service has not only grown in size, but also in power. And this power is evident. Just ask the people in Highlands County, Florida. They needed help, but at least one FEMA official used her power to make help harder to get. We only know this because one whistleblower was brave enough to come forward, but others knew about this and said nothing. And FEMA leadership didn't take action against this supervisor until the press exposed the discrimination. More importantly, FEMA officials did not immediately end the discrimination. Since being fired, this supervisor has made multiple media appearances claiming she was following direction from above and that this practice is widespread. So, the question is this. From FEMA's perspective, was her main offense not only saying the quiet part out loud, but that she put it in writing? Who knows how many victims of Florida were left out of rapid disaster relief response? And what about other areas of the country? How long has this gone on and where? It is not acceptable for anyone to threaten the life or safety of FEMA employees, and FEMA does not protect its people, but this does not justify writing off a huge segment of the population. I'm eager to hear from the administrator today about the status of FEMA's disaster relief efforts, as well as how we can prevent further discrimination. I want to thank you, Administrator, for being here today, and I now yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your victory, and thank you for your magnanimous statement at the beginning. I know you're proud of the 4 million vote majority, which the president-elect seems to have now, just as we were proud of the 7 million vote majority that Joe Biden had 4 years ago. The difference, of course, is that we acknowledge the loss of our candidate in this election, and we're not involved in trying to overturn the election or the Constitution, but we accept the Constitution and we accept the victory of the president-elect. Now, thank you for calling this hearing today. As of last month, more than 300 Americans had lost their lives to the hurricanes. Millions of people across the Southeast have had their lives uprooted, their families displaced, and their communities ravaged by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Friends of my family were forced from their home in Asheville, North Carolina, and they came to stay with us in Maryland for several weeks following this nightmare. And we closely tracked the recovery effort, which has been unceasing and determined, even though aid was still too slow in getting into some communities. FEMA is America's lifeline in disasters like these, coordinating rapid response and recovery efforts with state and local first responders and rescue agencies. In these hurricanes, FEMA deployed swiftly, providing survivors with temporary shelter, debris removal, and other emergency measures, including the $750 for serious needs assistance for individuals to get items like food, water, baby formula, and medicine. FEMA's disaster work is not conducted by a unitary force of full-time federal government employees, but rather a dynamic team of emergency responders and agencies drawn from across the country, which includes federal, state, and local workers, full-time and part-time employees, and private contractors. Two of my own constituents, Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service Captains Josh Kurland and Dave Hutchinson, went south with rescue teams to help communities hit by Hurricane Helene. FEMA workers from around America help their fellow Americans get back on their feet after a disaster like this. Now, even in the heat of the presidential election, Mr. Chairman, FEMA's response won high praise from leaders across the political spectrum. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin said, quote, "I'm incredibly appreciative of the rapid response and the cooperation from the team at FEMA." Florida Governor DeSantis said, quote, "Everything we've asked for from President Biden, he has approved." And our Florida colleague, Congresswoman Luna, said, "As I'm seeing, FEMA has been very helpful, and I've been in direct communication with them, and they're absolutely going to assist because President Biden has told them to do so." So we could be here today celebrating the workforce of 22,000 FEMA workers, but instead, we're invited to focus on one so-called intermittent employee in Florida whose team encountered what she called political hostility while canvassing door-to-door for FEMA in Florida. Thereupon, as I understand it, she made the judgment that her workers were unsafe, and she issued the order to her team not to go to any more houses in the neighborhood where there were Trump signs planted in the yard. This was a bad mistake, legally and constitutionally, which violated the core mission of FEMA and every federal agency to work on behalf of all Americans. It's plainly wrong and divisive to use a presidential campaign lawn sign as a proxy for someone's dangerousness. The director of FEMA, who's with us today, Ms. Criswell, properly acted immediately within 36 hours of learning of the incident because this action was an egregious departure from the norms of nonpartisanship which must govern the conduct and the work of the federal workforce. Federal workers have a duty to serve all Americans regardless of their political identification. FEMA's prompt and unequivocal personnel action in this case is powerful evidence that the civil service system is working, not only to deliver quality public service, but also to correct employee errors and ensure that the people whose homes were skipped, as in this case, receive outreach and assistance. And I understand that there were 20 homes that were skipped and then they were immediately addressed afterwards, but I want to ask about that. And none of this is to deny for a moment that in recent months, FEMA aid workers have been forced to work under a cloud of propaganda and lies concocted to erode public trust in FEMA. Because of this disinformation, many victims of hurricanes have rejected federal assistance, and others have even harassed and threatened FEMA workers. As Republican Congressman Chuck Edwards, who represents Asheville, North Carolina, said, all the misinformation has been, quote, not just unhelpful, but it's been harmful. I agree with my Republican colleagues and Administrator Criswell. Federal agencies must serve all Americans, and that means a federal workforce of nonpartisan professionals hired based on competence and merit. What's true of FEMA canvassers is, of course, true of the rest of the government. We need government for all the people, regardless of political viewpoint. President-elect Trump has promised to be a president for all Americans, and I hope he delivers on that. And if he falls short of it, I trust all my colleagues will hold him to it. In his first administration, President Trump all too often deliberately directed disaster aid based on the party politics of local leadership and past electoral performance, not the needs of the community and disaster survivors. In 2017, his administration denied 99% of the aid that North Carolina's Democratic governor requested as part of cleanup efforts after Hurricane Matthew. Also in 2017, after Hurricane Maria, President Trump blocked the full release of emergency assistance to Puerto Rico that was appropriated by us in Congress due to his unfounded belief that the destruction and death toll had been inflated to make him look bad. In 2018, after California suffered the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in its history, President Trump initially refused to approve disaster aid because of the state's liberal Democratic leanings. He reportedly later changed his mind after his staff provided him data showing that there were more Trump voters in Orange County, California than there were in the entire state of Iowa.